It was supposed to be a normal night. Sarah had kissed me goodbye before I left for Mike's, her voice light and carefree. Just a quiet gathering with a few friends from work. Nothing big, she'd said with a casual smile. But something had felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, just a feeling in my gut that made me uneasy. The way she had pushed me to go out, almost too eagerly, and how she'd said, "Don't worry about coming home early." It didn't sit right with me. I shrugged it off. After all, it was Sarah, my wife. There was no reason not to trust her, no reason to question anything. Or so I thought. The night at Mike's was quiet enough, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. By the time I decided to head home early, it was already past 11. I figured I'd pop in, maybe catch the tail end of Sarah's little gathering. But as I turned onto our street, I noticed something strange. Cars lined both sides of the road. Way too many cars for a small gathering. I parked a little farther down the block, staring at the scene in front of me. Our house was lit up, and I could hear music, loud, pulsing music, spilling out into the quiet night. My heart sank. This wasn't what Sarah had promised. I approached the front door, dread pooling in my stomach. As soon as I stepped inside, the music hit me like a wall. It wasn't just background music for casual conversation. It was party music, thumping, relentless. And the house was packed with people, strangers. I stood there for a moment, frozen, trying to make sense of the scene in front of me. This was no quiet gathering. This was a full-blown party. And as my eyes scanned the room, I saw her. Sarah. She was standing near the kitchen, laughing at something a man was saying. A man I'd never seen before. He was tall, athletic, with a smirk on his face as he leaned in close to her, his hand resting on the small of her back. The way she looked at him, her body language, it was too familiar, too intimate. My stomach twisted. Sarah hadn't seen me yet. She was too busy laughing, too wrapped up in whatever conversation she was having with this guy. But I saw everything. The way she tilted her head toward him, the way her body leaned into his touch. It was like I was invisible. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing to catch up with what I was seeing. This wasn't right. This wasn't the woman I knew. And then she saw me. Her eyes widened for a split second, and her smile faltered. But then, almost immediately, she recovered, flashing me that familiar, fake grin as she pulled away from the guy. "Hey, you're home early," she called out, her voice too cheerful, too quick. I didn't answer right away. My eyes were locked on hers, searching for something. An explanation, an excuse, anything to make sense of what I had just witnessed. But all I saw was guilt. I forced myself to walk further into the house, my gaze flicking between Sarah and the man who hadn't even bothered to step back. He just stood there, smirking, as if my presence didn't matter. "So, this is your quiet gathering?" I asked, my voice tight, trying to keep control of the anger rising in me. Sarah hesitated, her smile wavering. "Yeah, well, you know how it is," she said, trying to sound casual, but her voice was strained. "A few people from work brought some friends. It wasn't supposed to get this big." I looked at her, feeling the weight of her lie pressing down on me. And then, I turned to the guy. "And who's this?" Sarah's eyes flicked to him, just for a second, and I could see her scrambling for an answer. "Oh, this is Matt," she said, her voice a little too high-pitched. "He's a friend from work." Matt raised an eyebrow, clearly unfazed. "Yeah, man," he said, taking a sip of his drink. "We all get along pretty well at the office." The way he said it, so casual, so dismissive, made my blood boil. I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. The way he stood too close to Sarah, too comfortable in my house. "And you've been getting along real well, huh?" I said, my voice low, my fists clenching at my sides. Sarah took a step forward, her hands raised slightly, as if trying to calm the situation. "Dave, don't. You're overreacting. It's just a party, okay? Nothing's going on." But I wasn't buying it. Not this time. I stepped closer to Sarah, lowering my voice. "If nothing's going on, then why do you look so nervous?" Her eyes widened, and I saw it. That flicker of panic, the crack in her calm facade. She bit her lip, glancing away, and I knew. I knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding. Something had been happening behind my back, and now it was unraveling right in front of me. How long, Sarah? I asked, my voice sharp. How long has this been going on? She blinked, caught off guard. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Instead, she glanced back at Matt, just for a second, but it was enough. The look they shared wasn't casual. It wasn't innocent. My gut churned, the realization hitting me like a punch to the stomach. This wasn't just a party. This was something much worse. Finally, Sarah found her voice. Dave, stop, she said, her voice trembling. You're blowing this out of proportion. There's nothing going on, I swear. But her words sounded hollow. The guilt in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. I glanced at Matt, my anger barely contained. You seem pretty comfortable for a work friend. Matt smirked, shrugging. We're just having fun, man. Relax. His casual tone made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't lose it now, not in front of all these people, not when I needed answers. How long? I repeated, my voice hard. How long have you been sneaking around behind my back? Sarah's face paled. Her eyes flickered with panic, and for the first time, I saw her composure crack completely. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she tried to find something, anything, to say that could make this go away. It's not like that, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It's been a few months, but it wasn't supposed to go this far. The words hung in the air between us, each one stabbing deeper than the last. Months. Not days, not weeks, months. I clenched my jaw, the tightness in my chest growing unbearable. Months? I repeated, almost in disbelief. You've been lying to me for months? Sarah bit her lip, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice cracking. I was lonely, Dave. You've been so distant lately, and I didn't know what to do. Lonely? I echoed, my voice rising. So this is how you fix it? By sneaking around with him? I gestured toward Matt, who had finally stopped smirking, his expression now tense. He didn't say anything, just stood there, watching the scene unfold like a spectator at a disaster he'd helped create. I didn't want to hurt you, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't know how to fix things between us. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. So you thought cheating on me was the answer? Tears finally spilled over onto her cheeks, and she reached for me, her hand shaking. Please, Dave. I'm so sorry. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. We can work through it. I took a step back, out of her reach. The anger boiling inside me was too much, too raw. The betrayal, the lies. It all felt like it was suffocating me. I don't think you understand what you've done, I said, my voice cold. You didn't just lie to me. You destroyed everything. Our marriage, our trust. It's all gone, Sarah sobbed, covering her face with her hands. But I didn't feel any sympathy for her. Not anymore. I turned to Matt, who had been standing silently, watching us. And you? I said, my voice low. Did you know she was married? Did you care at all? Matt shrugged, but he couldn't meet my gaze. Look, man, it wasn't serious. We were just having some fun. That's all. Fun, I repeated, the word leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. That's all this was to you? He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off, the anger finally spilling over. Get out, I snapped, my voice tight. Get the hell out of my house. Matt hesitated for a second, his eyes flicking towards Sarah as if she might stop him. But she didn't. She just stood there, crying, her body shaking with silent sobs. Matt nodded, finally turning to leave. He walked past me without another word, and the front door clicked shut behind him, leaving only silence in its wake. I turned back to Sarah, who was still standing there, her face buried in her hands. She looked so small, so broken, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. The damage was done. The silence in the house was suffocating. Sarah sat on the couch, her face pale and tear-streaked, while I stood near the window, my back turned to her. The weight of everything that had just happened pressed down on me like a heavy fog. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. I could feel the anger simmering just beneath the surface, but it wasn't the kind of rage that would explode all at once. No, this was different. Cold, calculated. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. "We need to talk," Sarah said finally, her voice weak and barely audible. I turned, my expression hard. "Oh, we'll talk," I said, my voice firm. "But not now. There are things I need to take care of first." Her face twisted in confusion. "What do you mean?" "We have to figure this out, Dave. We can't just—" I said. "Not now," I snapped, cutting her off. She flinched at the sharpness of my tone, but didn't argue. She knew she was in no position to push me. Not after everything that had just come to light. Without another word, I grabbed my jacket and left the house, leaving Sarah sitting there, drowning in the mess she had created. As I walked down the street, my mind was already working, piecing together what had to happen next. I wasn't just going to leave this at an angry confrontation. That wasn't enough. She had lied to me, betrayed me, and now, she was going to feel the full weight of her choices. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Mike. I had reached out to him earlier, explaining what had happened, and now he was ready to meet. Perfect. We met at a bar not far from my house, a quiet place where we could talk without being interrupted. Mike was already there when I arrived, sitting at a booth in the back. He waved me over, his expression tense. "Hey, man," he said as I slid into the seat across from him. "You okay? You sounded pretty upset earlier." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I'm not okay," I said, my voice tight. "But I'm going to be." Mike raised an eyebrow, clearly unsure of what I meant. "What happened?" I told him everything. The party, Sarah's affair with Matt, the months of lies. As I spoke, I could see Mike's expression shift from shock to anger, and by the time I finished, he was shaking his head in disbelief. "Jesus, Dave," he muttered. "I don't even know what to say. That's messed up." "Yeah," I agreed, my voice bitter. "But I'm not just going to sit around and let them get away with it. I need your help." Mike leaned in, intrigued. "What's the plan?" I looked him dead in the eye. "We're going to expose them. Make sure everyone knows what they did. They won't be able to cover this up. Not after we're done." Mike looked at me for a moment, his expression serious. "You're really going to do this, aren't you?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "She lied to me for months, Mike. I'm not just going to let that slide. I need people to know who she really is, who Matt really is." Mike leaned back, letting out a low whistle. "All right, man. I've got your back. Just tell me what you need." We spent the next hour planning. I laid out everything I wanted to do. Expose Sarah and Matt to the people closest to them. I wasn't interested in a public spectacle, not yet. I just wanted to make sure the truth came out, slowly, where it would hurt the most. Sarah had created a carefully crafted image for herself. I was going to tear it apart, piece by piece. When we were done, Mike clapped me on the shoulder. "You know, this is a pretty brutal move, Dave. She deserves it," I said firmly. "They both do." Mike nodded, though I could see the concern flicker in his eyes. He didn't say anything more, and we left the bar with a plan set in motion. That night, I returned home to find Sarah sitting on the couch, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up at me as I walked in, her face filled with a mix of fear and desperation. "Dave," she started, her voice trembling. "Please, we need to talk. We can't just ignore this." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I moved to stand in front of her, crossing my arms over my chest. "We'll talk," I said coldly, "but not until you tell me the truth. All of it." Sarah blinked, her lips parting as she struggled to find the right words. I don't know what to say. I've already told you. I don't want excuses," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "I want to know exactly how long this has been going on. How long have you been lying to me?" She hesitated, and for a second, I thought she might try to lie again. But then she let out a long, shaky breath, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "It started about 6 months ago," she whispered, barely able to meet my gaze. "I didn't mean for it to go this far, Dave. I swear." 6 months, I repeated, the words like acid in my mouth. "And you didn't mean for it to go this far? Do you even realize how ridiculous that sounds?" She flinched at the venom in my tone, but didn't argue. Her silence said everything I needed to know. I took a step back, staring down at her as the anger and betrayal surged through me. "We'll talk later," I said finally, my voice tight. "After I've figured out what comes next." Before she could respond, I turned and headed upstairs, leaving her alone in the silence of our broken marriage. The next few days were a blur. Sarah and I barely spoke, the tension in the house growing thicker with every passing moment. She tried to make small gestures, leaving breakfast on the counter, sending me quick texts, but I ignored them all. I wasn't interested in patching things up. I was interested in making her feel the same pain she put me through. Mike and I kept in close contact, finalizing the details of the plan. We decided to time the confrontation for a night when a few of Sarah's close friends would be at the house. They had no idea what was coming, but when it happened, there would be no hiding from the truth. The day of the party arrived. Sarah seemed on edge, her movements jittery, her eyes flicking toward me nervously every time we passed each other in the house. She knew something was coming, but she didn't know what. As the evening wore on, the house slowly filled with guests, Sarah's friends, mostly. I stayed in the background, keeping to myself, letting the tension build. Sarah kept glancing at me, as if silently pleading for some sort of resolution, but I gave her nothing. I waited until the party was in full swing, until everyone had settled into conversations and drinks. Then I made my move. I cleared my throat, drawing the room's attention. The conversations died down, and everyone turned to look at me, confused. Sarah was standing near the kitchen, her face paling as she realized something was about to happen. "Thanks for coming tonight, everyone," I said, my voice steady. "There's something I need to talk about." The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I could see the confusion on their faces, the concern. Sarah shifted nervously, her hands clenched at her sides. I turned to her, my gaze hard. "Sarah, you want to explain what's been going on behind my back?" Her eyes widened in panic, her face draining of color. "Dave," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please don't." I ignored her plea, addressing the room instead. For the past 6 months, Sarah has been having an affair. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sarah's friends exchanged shocked glances, their disbelief clear on their faces. Sarah stood frozen, her eyes wide with terror, as the truth began to unravel. "With Matt," I added, watching as the revelation hit like a bomb. More whispers, more stunned looks. Sarah's closest friends stared at her, waiting for some sort of explanation, but none came. I turned to Sarah, my voice calm but cutting. "So, do you want to tell them how long you've been lying to all of us? Or should I?" Sarah's mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked like she was on the verge of breaking down, her body trembling as she stood there, exposed. The room hung in thick silence, tension pulling tighter with every second. Sarah stood there, pale and trembling, like a deer caught in headlights. Her friends stared at her, waiting for an explanation, but none came. She was trapped. "Dave, stop," she finally whispered, her voice shaking. "Please, don't do this here." I could feel the weight of every gaze on us, but I wasn't stopping. Not after everything she'd done. "No, Sarah, you don't get to decide when this ends. You made your choices." One of her friends, Claire, spoke up, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Sarah, is this true? Did you really?" Sarah's eyes darted between me and her friends, her lips trembling. I didn't mean for it to happen," she stammered, her voice barely audible. It's not what you think." I stepped closer, cutting off her excuses. "It's exactly what it looks like. You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around with Matt behind my back." Her face crumpled, and she buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with silent sobs. The room buzzed with murmurs, her friends exchanging shocked looks, unsure how to respond to the sudden unraveling of Sarah's perfect facade. The pity in their eyes made me sick. "You ruined everything, Sarah," I said, my voice steady but cold. "And now everyone knows." She lowered her hands, her tear-streaked face pale as she looked up at me, her eyes wide with desperation. "Please, Dave," she whispered, "don't do this. We can still fix this. I'll do anything. Just, just don't leave me." Her words fell on deaf ears. There was nothing left to fix. "You already threw it all away," I said. "It's over." The finality in my voice seemed to crush her. She sank onto the couch, her head in her hands, her sobs filling the room. But I didn't feel satisfaction. There was no triumph in this moment, just emptiness. I had exposed her, destroyed the image she had tried so hard to maintain, but it didn't fill the void her betrayal had left inside me. "I'm done," I said quietly. "And you should be too." Without another word, I turned and walked out of the house, leaving Sarah to face the wreckage she had created. Her friends would try to comfort her, but they wouldn't look at her the same way again. The cool night air hit me like a slap as I stepped outside. I could still hear the muffled sounds of the party inside, the whispers, the shocked murmurs, but it all felt distant now, like a world I had just left behind. I walked down the driveway, my mind buzzing with everything that had just happened. The confrontation had gone exactly as I had planned. Sarah was exposed, and there was no way for her to talk her way out of this now. Her friends knew the truth, and that would spread. Slowly, her perfect little world would crumble. But standing there, in the stillness of the night, I didn't feel the victory I had expected. I had imagined that seeing her fall apart would give me some kind of closure, some kind of satisfaction. But all I felt was the weight of it all, the betrayal, the lies, the destruction of everything I thought I knew. I leaned against the hood of my car, staring at the empty street, my thoughts heavy. I had walked away from Sarah, but what now? I was free of the lies, free of the marriage that had been suffocating me for months. But the emptiness inside me remained. The door opened behind me, and I turned to see Mike stepping out of the house. He looked at me for a moment before walking over, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "You all right?" he asked quietly, his voice low. I shrugged, still staring at the ground. "I don't know. I thought this would feel better." Mike stood beside me, nodding slowly. "I get it, man. You did what you had to do, but it doesn't always feel good." I glanced at him, his words sinking in. He was right. Revenge didn't heal the wounds. It just brought everything to the surface. The pain was still there, raw and real. "So, what now?" Mike asked, his voice cautious. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision that lay ahead. "Now, I move on." Mike nodded, offering a small, supportive smile. "If you need anything, you know I'm here." "Thanks," I said quietly. We stood there in silence for a few moments before Mike headed back inside, leaving me alone again. I glanced back at the house one last time. The lights were still on, and I could see shadows moving inside, hear the faint sound of Sarah's sobs. But I didn't feel the need to go back. Not anymore. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove off, leaving behind the life I had known for so long. I didn't know where I was going, didn't know what came next. But for the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of relief. The weight of Sarah's betrayal was still there, but it no longer controlled me. I had faced it, exposed it, and now I was free to start over. The days after the confrontation were a blur. I stayed with Mike for a while, avoiding Sarah's texts and calls. She tried to reach out, sending long, apologetic messages, asking me to come back, to talk. But I ignored them all. The house was no longer a home. It was a reminder of everything that had been shattered, and I couldn't bring myself to return to the place where it all fell apart. I focused on the practical things, meeting with a lawyer, getting my affairs in order. Sarah and I had been together for years, and disentangling our lives wasn't going to be easy. But I knew it was necessary. The legal process was long and draining, but it gave me something to focus on. Every step was a step away from the past, a step toward reclaiming my life. Mike checked in on me often, making sure I was okay. I appreciated his support, but there were days when the loneliness crept in, when the weight of everything hit me all over again. The truth was, even though I had left Sarah, even though I had exposed her lies, the pain of her betrayal didn't just vanish. It lingered. But over time, the anger began to fade. The grief, the heartbreak, they were still there, but they didn't consume me like they had before. I started going out again, spending time with friends, finding pieces of myself that I had lost along the way. One night, after months of silence, I received a final text from Sarah. "I'm sorry for everything. I hope you find peace." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling the familiar sting of loss. But I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. I had found my peace, but it wasn't because of Sarah's apology. It was because I had taken control of my life again, taken the steps I needed to move forward. As I sat there, the weight of the past lifting, I realized something. I was free.